So you're a new teacher, and you want to learn how to make a unit plan. While at first it does seem a little confusing, you will feel so satisfied after it's all done. There's a lot to consider while creating a unit plan, and while you may feel overwhelmed at first, I'm here to help. I know you are eager to start, so let's get started. First, you want to think about all the steps it takes in completing a unit plan. I know, while at first it can seem so confusing, I promise we can get through it together. While I know that looking at all the requirements needed to finish a unit plan, I agree that it can seem like too much work. Now I know what you're thinking. Why even take the time to plan out a unit? My practicum teacher doesn't seem to need one, so why should I? I'm just going to wing it. However, that is a terrible idea. Remember, you became a teacher for the students. You want them to learn as much as possible and gain the knowledge that they are supposed to. You want them to achieve in your class. So always remember to plan out all of your lessons. Make sure you have all of the steps of your lessons planned out so your students will be able to achieve greatness. And don't worry, I have an idea that will get us both through the tedious job of planning a unit. Now here's my idea. We're gonna go backwards. What? I know. Trust me, it'll work. Now I know what you're thinking. Backwards? How does that even work? Well, let me tell you. It's called backward design. It's a method of designing educational curriculum by setting goals before choosing instructional methods and forms of assessment. The backward design of curriculum typically involves the 3 stages, and if you stay tuned, I'll let you know what those are. There are many requirements to consider while planning a lesson. First is a Common Core SOL, learn your state standards. Then you want to determine how you're going to assess your students, whether it be formative or summative. You want to determine the content each lesson will hold and how much time each lesson will take to unfold. Last, you want to determine the objectives and goals for your students. But don't make all those requirements make you want to run away. Remember, we have backwards design to help us, and there are 3 easy steps to follow. The first step to designing a unit plan is you want to plan your desired results. What objectives and goals do you want your students to get out of the lessons that you teach? Next, you want to determine the acceptable evidence. These are your formative and summative assessments. How are you going to assess your students? Then you want to plan the learning experiences. This is designing the actual lessons themselves. While still following the first step of the backwards design model, which is planning the desired results, you want to identify the objectives for your students. You want them to develop essential questions and ideas, and you will list these in your unit plan, and they will be present throughout your unit and your lessons. While still following the first lesson, you will identify what you want your students to know. These are the new facts, vocab, and information each lesson will teach them. Then you want to identify the big ideas that the students will understand in each lesson. Next, you want to determine the new skills that you want your students to learn in each lesson. All of these should be present throughout the unit. Where will you find these objectives and standards, you may ask? Well, if you go to your state's Department of Education website, like the Virginia DOE, you will find the standards for each grade and subject, and you'll be able to pick from a large pool of options. You can never forget to add standards to your lessons, though. We have finally made it to the second step of the backwards design model, which is determining acceptable evidence. These are your assessments. First, we will discuss summative assessment. The goal of summative assessment is to evaluate your students' learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing it against some standard or benchmark. These are often high stakes, which means they are graded. Next, we will discuss formative assessment. The goal of formative assessment is to monitor student learning and to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by you to improve your teaching and by your students to improve their learning. Formative assessment helps students identify their strengths and weaknesses and helps you realize where your students are struggling so you can target the areas that need work. Congrats! You've made it through the most tedious part of lesson planning. Now go treat yourself. But not really, because you have the last and final step of backwards design to consider. This can be considered the most important part because these are the lessons that you will teach in your classroom. This is the end to part 1, but find part 2 to learn more about lesson models.
Created using Powtoon.